Hello, and welcome to Storytime with Matt. This is the author reading my own original content and sharing it with you free of charge on YouTube. I am going to ask that you immediately lower your expectations of this work. You get what you pay for. What I'm posting is a working draft, not a final product. I'm sharing you I'm sharing this with you early and as is, hoping you can help me add some depth. The story is set, but the character traits, descriptions of the settings, and some colorful details will be added before this work is published. With that in mind, I encourage you to share your thoughts by following the link to the Reddit site for this book, where I can engage with you directly. You can help me build out the story, and I'll pray Christ would guide us through things with grace and love. That being said, let me share chapter 1 of my new book, titled This Could Be Happening Now. Chapter 4. Well, from what I remember, I grew up on a small farm on the edge of a little town. And when I say little, I mean little, like 40 people, little. My family moved there from the city. Well, I should say my dad brought my mom there from the city. Sorry, I should back up a little more, I guess. My great-grandparents were homesteaders. They moved out and stole the land from the Native Americans. They claim to have bought the land at a fair price from the US government, but it was still the same thing, right? They bought land that wasn't rightfully theirs and removed the people who used that land to hunt and travel through. But as it happened, my great-grandfather was a pretty good farmer. He seemed to know how to work the land better than his neighbors even. Over just a few years, his farmland grew to one of the largest in the area. My grandpa was born and raised on that farm, working alongside his dad to develop a pretty sprawling and productive farming operation. My dad was born into that, the middle child of 3 kids. He grew up on the farm just like his dad, but didn't take to farming near as well as his older brother, so he focused on other things, like getting out of the tiny town. He loved cars and studied how they were made. He worked with a mechanic in a larger, nearby town, but was told he didn't have the feel, whatever that means. When he graduated high school, he was fired instead of promoted to be a full-time mechanic like he was expecting. I promise this all does become relevant. So, instead of staying close and working, he went off to college. It's not a big deal now, but this was much harder when my dad did it. Loans were not easy to get. You had to convince someone to invest their money in you. And if you were just a kid who didn't know what he was going to study, that's a tough sell. But that's exactly what my dad did. He applied for a new government-backed loan and was accepted. He moved to Chicago and started at the University of Chicago with a general major. That's where he met my mom. She grew up in Chicago and also had a government-backed loan. She was studying sociology with the hopes of becoming a therapist or a social worker for the poor and disenfranchised. She actually had a gay sister and saw the struggle she went through before she later killed herself. My mom really wanted to find a way to reach out to other teens struggling with their gender and sexual identities and prevent what happened to her sister from happening again. Anyways, my dad started school and found out there was a program for drafting cars. He always enjoyed art and thought it might be an interesting course. He fell in love immediately. He spent the next 4 years studying how to build car model parts from clay that would then be used as models for crafting body parts of cars. The month after he graduated, a new computer program was introduced that did the same thing for half the price. My dad's entire field was cut over the course of 1 year, leaving him with a completely worthless degree. While going to school, he had met and married my mom. They had my older brother Aaron and had bought a house on credit, expecting my dad to take one of the many open jobs in his field. When all of those jobs disappeared overnight, money got tight. They sold the house and moved into a small apartment. My mom's education had been put on hold so she could raise my brother, leaving my dad to work whatever odd jobs he could to make ends meet. It wasn't going well. Then I came into the picture. I guess when my mom found out she was pregnant with me, she couldn't even call my dad to tell him because he had forgotten to pay the phone bill. She had to wait until he got home. She thought about walking to the abortion clinic, but decided to wait for my dad to get home. If it wasn't so far, she would have driven, but it really wasn't safe for her to walk with Aaron that far. So she waited. I guess she wished she hadn't, but I don't know. That's what my dad always used to say, that she never wanted me in the first place. So as you can see, she did not get the abortion. I should probably mention here that my dad was raised a strict Catholic, no abortions. And it doesn't matter that we never went to church, we didn't pray at night or over our meals, hell, we didn't even own a Bible. All of that wasn't important. The only important thing was that we don't have abortions. My mom and dad argued, but my mom eventually agreed that it would be better to have me. Things did stabilize for a while. My dad was able to get a job at an insurance company that paid well enough. He provided a good life for my mom to have a social life outside of raising us kids. He wasn't very fulfilled at work, but he did what he could with us. I don't remember this much, but Aaron told me some stuff about it. Anyways, my mom was one semester short of graduating with a bachelor's degree when my dad got a call from home. His brother had died in a farming accident. After the funeral, we had to decide what would happen to the farm. His wife was not able to work the fields, and my grandpa couldn't keep up with that work alone. He agreed to teach my dad what to do if he wanted to come back home. So, our family relocated from Chicago back to Florence, named after my great-grandma. I was 4 years old when we moved back. I spent most of my young life on that farm. It all seemed pleasant enough when I was going through it, but looking back I can see the tension. My dad did not take to farming. There was so much to learn, and my dad struggled with learning as it was. He had land to manage, weather to monitor, employees, taxes, and on and on and on. He couldn't keep up, and my grandpa would never be called a patient man. It took a few years, but eventually my dad had to sell the farm. He couldn't keep up with the work. Unfortunately, he had also mismanaged the money so bad that he didn't make a dime on the sale of the land. We had the house, but everything else went to debt. I honestly don't know if my dad and my grandpa ever really talked again. My dad knew he had disappointed my grandpa and never even got a chance to make it right. My grandpa died about a month after my dad sold the farm. My dad kept working on the farm as a hired hand for Daniel, the man he sold the farm to. He worked hard and things got somewhat more stable again, but my dad was never the same. My mom helped my brother and I make the best of things. Aaron was 3 years older than me, and we really did have a lot of fun growing up. My dad kept most of his frustrations at work, so it didn't interfere with my young life too much. I remember trips to the park, swinging on swings, bike rides, fishing, and sledding, all with my big brother. Mom was there most of the time, laughing alongside us. Dad was there periodically, but not usually in a fun way. Take my 10th birthday, for example. We were having a party, and my mom had invited 2 of my friends from school. The plan was to have my friends over after school and then for a sleepover. The rest was open. As soon as we got home, we went to the basement, our usual hangout spot. My parents pretty much left us alone. There wasn't much we could get into there. The house was unbelievably old in some places and amazingly new in others. We would occasionally find some interesting things that had been left behind. Some old saws in the rafters, extra wood, spare vent pieces, and as my friends and I discovered that night, a magazine left by one of the workers. We were honestly looking for boards to build a fort when my friend came down holding a magazine. We put it down between us and opened it to reveal a treasure trove of boobs and butts, tight tanned skin and lips and sweat, everything a prepubescent boy needs. We all ogled silently for at least a minute before we dove in. We took no regard for what we were doing or where we were. We each just grabbed whatever we could get our hands on and started devouring. It was at this point that my dad decided to come home. The first thing he always did when he got home was sit on the toilet in the basement, so I knew he would be down, and we only had seconds. I frantically grabbed the magazine from my friend's hands and shoved it in under my shirt. I turned as my dad came down the stairs. He grunted in our direction and then turned the knob to the bathroom. I sighed in relief as the door clicked shut. The relief was immediately replaced with terror as my dad's voice called from behind the door. "Tyler, would you come here, please?" The door opened, and the first thing I could see was a naked man. My dad was holding a page from the magazine that must have been torn as we were hiding it. I hung my head in shame, and my dad had his answer. He rolled up the piece of paper and smacked me in the face. "Not my son," he said as he walked out into the basement. My friends looked on in horror as my dad followed me out of the bathroom. "Mr. Miller, don't," Brock said, but he was cut off by my dad's face as he turned to look at them. My dad took a quick, short breath and then said to my friends, "The 2 of you, get your things. You are going home now." I watched on in silent fury as my friends gathered their things. We didn't do anything wrong. We looked at a few magazines. What was the problem? Why was my dad being like this? Confusion, disappointment, anger, resentment, rage all swam in my head as my dad brought each of my friends home. He explained what had happened to each of their parents while I sat in the car by myself, waiting, getting more embarrassed and more angry by the minute. We rode home in silence. When we got there, he parked the car and then looked at me. "I may have overreacted," he said earnestly. "Look, kid, you can't get into that stuff. You can't start with that stuff or it'll be stuck with you forever. I wish I could explain it better, but I can't. That's all I got. All I know is what my dad told me and that I wish I had listened. I didn't listen, but you try to, okay? Try to be better than me. He let a silence ring in the car for a moment. I had no idea how to respond, or even what to think about his rambling, so I didn't say anything. After a minute, he got out of the car and told me to come in when I was ready. I sat by myself for over an hour, going through what had happened. All my little brain seemed to be able to understand was that my dad is an asshole, and that I like seeing people naked. There was a whole mix of stuff in there. The end of chapter 4.